Hello everybody and welcome to another IAPC&M CPD business building call. I'm Dawn Campbell, your host, and as usual in this series of calls, I'm joined by the head of accreditation, David Monroe-Jones. Hello David.
Hi Dawn, hi everyone.
And in the hot seat today, we have the lovely Ruby Maguire, who's looking very chilled with her cappuccino in her seat there. Ruby is a business mastery and mindset queen. So welcome, Ruby.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So this is the 10th in a series of 12 capability calls to help you sail through your IAPC&M live assessment call. And the topic, as you can see from the screen, is action planning. Actually, this and the next call, accountability, is probably some of the main reasons why people hire coaches. There is a saying, something along the lines, and don't quote me on the exact percentages, but 10% of people who have an idea get things done. And if you've got an idea and you make a decision, you're 40% likely to get your success. And if you've got an idea, a decision, and a plan, you're 50% likely to achieve. If you've got an idea, you make a decision, you make a plan, and you actually tell somebody, you're 65% likely to achieve. But this is where call number 9 or 10 and 11 come in. When you've got an idea, you make a decision, you make a plan, you tell somebody, and you report it back, usually to your coach, you're 95% likely to succeed. So that's a whopping difference. And that's what we're here to talk about today. But as usual, David, as head of accreditation, it's a good place if you would just start by saying what it is that you're looking for in an assessment call when it comes to this stage, please.
Okay, cool. So I thought that, as always, so like for this bit, so like I'd just go through the actual definition that we work with. So action planning is the ability to create an effective coaching plan with the client. So the key things that we would look for is that we're helping the client on the real issue. So, you know, the things that are actually going to address whatever it is that they brought and make so like a positive difference. Make sure that the client is prepared for the future action so that they have confidence in their capability. That they are challenging but achievable steps. So, you know, that might relate back to sort of the A from there, SMART objectives, but also that they're committed to take them. And also that, you know, like what resources do they have for moving forwards. And some of the things that might come up, so like within this, that, you know, where certainly you can lose points is if that real issue isn't identified, or it's underexplored, or the coach has a tendency to be taken down tangent boulevard or distraction drive, and, you know, and doesn't make that return. Or the coach, and this can happen if the coach has a lot of experience in that area, they either take the initiative for setting out the plans or the deadlines, or they infer through questions that there's a certain route that needs to be taken. If you don't pick up on commitment, that can sort of like cause a few problems. You know, potential issues if you haven't addressed such things as, you know, like what might get in the way. And one of my favorites, because, you know, clients sometimes want to put out an impression that, you know, like that they're really behind what they're talking about. And if a coach doesn't pick up on something that is, you know, like an underpinning issue, if you don't sort of like hear that or note it or challenge it, and you accept something on 100% blind faith, that you're like, oh, of course, you know, of course my client will do that because I followed the T-Grow model. What else can there be? That that, you know, that as well, so like can be, you know, it can be something so like where you can lose points. So if you were gonna summarize this, And it does come down to sort of like the previous sort of CPD calls that we've had, certainly up to and including number 9 in terms of considering options. If you haven't done steps 1 to 9 correctly, by the time you come to this point, then you might end up with an action plan, but it won't necessarily be an action plan that really succeeds, or you'll struggle to put that action plan together because you have to have the conversation up to this point. And that's just as applicable for people at a practitioner level as it is for people at a senior and a master level. And what I would also add, and I'm sure Dawn, so that you can add to this as well from your own experience in assessing, if people are going to lose points or drop points or score lowly, and in some cases not score at all, then it's either action planning or it's managing process and accountability. They are the ones that tend to be the bits that often get overlooked, so like within the coaching assessment. And I have a big issue about action planning and managing progress and accountabilities in that. Yeah. So like as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it comes down to experience, particularly with new practitioners, doesn't it, David?
Yeah, and I think I mean, one of the things I'm sure we'll talk about within this call is that you have to have the courage of your convictions as a coach. Like you're there to be friendly, not their friend. They're not they're not paying you for nothing. They're paying you to get results. And as I seem to do, so like on all of these calls, and I go back to contracting, as I always sort of tend to do, is that at that contracting stage, you need to establish that the client is going to do, what they say that they're going to do. And as somebody on a webinar I was on yesterday summed up quite nicely, you do not want to hire a client who is not going to do the work. And, it's far better to walk away and think, you know what, I'm not going to waste my time or their time than it is to, really put a lot of effort in working with somebody who's just not prepared to do it or they're not going to do it. So the contracting piece should establish that, yeah, they're committed, they're determined, there's a reason why they're going to do what they're going to do, and there's an understanding of the impact of not doing what they're going to do. And the other thing that sits in the center of that is that it's their reason, not a reason that somebody else has sort of imposed upon them and said, oh, by the way, I think you should do this. They may need to do it, but that's a sort of separate conversation around, well, why do you think other people think that you should do this? And again, all of this is going to come before the action planning stage. And you're right, it is very much about experience. The more experienced you get, the more used to picking up on these nuances that you will become. And as I've mentioned before, and I've got no issues in holding my hands up on this, when I started out, so like with T-Grow and when I was experimenting with some of the other models, I had Post-it notes everywhere. And so when I got to the the O and the W of of T-Grows, right, what should I be asking now? I need to be nailing them down and making sure. And when they said, I've written down all of these action points, fantastic. And on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your commitment? It's at a 10, brilliant. And I would just move on from that. But the more experience you get, when somebody goes, oh yeah, I'm at a number 10, that voice that goes, yeah, what really? Yeah, there's just something that tells me that I'm not sure about that. And at that point, that's when you would start to, really investigate and say, look, I appreciate what you're saying, but my sense is that, something's missing here. And that experience and picking up on those things is really useful, because they may turn around and go, no, I am committed, there isn't anything. In which case, in your own reflection, you can look back and go, well, what was it that suggested that there was something? Or if they turn around and they go, yeah, actually, you're right. In your reflection, you can look at, well, what was it? What was it that indicated that something wasn't quite right with this? So I talk an awful lot about the contracting piece at the beginning, but the personal reflection that you do after a coaching session, is equally as important, because that sort of tells you, sort of like what's going on. And for those of you who weren't able to attend the webinar that we had with Michelle Lucas on aspects of a new book supervision, one of the techniques that she mentioned in that around, if there was an object on your desk, what would it see that you don't see when you do your personal reflections afterwards? I think is a great, is a great way of learning, so that as you go through your different sort of coaching sessions or mentoring sessions or whatever they may be, that period of reflection afterwards of, right, what did, in my case, Cuddly Toy, what did it see that I didn't see? What was going on? What things did I miss? What things didn't I miss? What could I have done differently? And that again, helps us to learn. It's not just a case of thinking, yeah, that went well, move on, or that wasn't so good, move on. There has to be that process of reflection. And there's a clue in the title when people go through the assessment, when you get something that says personal reflection, that, as I have had to do with a number of people, and chase them and go, you haven't done this yet, and they come back and go, oh, I thought you were doing it. And I've said, no, there's a clue in the title where it says personal reflection, not my reflection. So that helps people to sort of bring together, well, what did I do? What did I learn? How will I apply it in the future? Which is probably a lot more of an answer than you wanted. But I sort of went off on one and I couldn't really stop myself.
Well, every time we have these calls, we get sort of very enthusiastic about how important this step is. Actually, they're all really important. So what would you add to this, Ruby? Because I know that you're a very passionate advocate of planning with your mind maps, and you do it very creatively. So we'd love to hear from you, please.
I think from when you're coaching with clients, one of the things that it's really easy to get into the trap of, and David was talking about it there, where it is that there's so many things. You might have a really excited client, like, yeah, I want to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. So it has to be realistic. It's like, okay, so how much time can you give to this, to make sure that they're on the right track? And I think also not to be feeding in your own ideas. And I really fell into that trap in the early days of coaching of, well, now that we've done that, I think this would be a great thing for you to work on, when actually it needs to be led by them, because otherwise they won't take the action. And I completely echo what David says. If you've got a client that you think they're not going to take action, just don't touch them. Don't take them on, because they're going to be hard work from day one. And you'll constantly be wanting to solve the problem for them, when actually they have to take the responsibility to work on taking action themselves. You can't be that person for them. So, yeah.
I would add to that, if somebody shows up for their second or their third session and they haven't done what they said they were going to do, as coaches, is our responsibility before we say, this perhaps isn't the right relationship, it's not working, and there's another coach out there. But the first thing that you need to do is address the self-sabotage. It's okay having a great action plan, but if you don't ask questions such as, how long has this been an issue, and when would you like it addressed by, and what was the trigger, you're never going to understand their pain motivation and their pleasure motivation. So they might want to lose weight or change their career or whatever. But unless you ask, say, well, just give me a snapshot in the last 2 weeks, what are some of the things that have stopped you doing this? Let's just quickly brainstorm the things that have sabotaged you. Then not only open Pandora's box and ask what they are, but what I hear in assessment calls is, if we're lucky, a practitioner will do that, but then they just leave the client hanging. So of course those issues are going to continue in the second session and the third session, and probably explain why they haven't done what they said they were going to do, because we haven't explored the tools or the steps for them to overcome those obstacles. So by having the confidence, and obviously this comes with practice, of addressing self-sabotage, and not just opening Pandora's box, but dealing with each and every step that comes out of that. So, okay, the next time it's cold and it's dark and you don't want to get out from under the duvet, and you've said that you want to get fit and healthy because you've got a marathon coming up in 6 months' time, what are you going to do to make sure you get your feet in those trainers? Right, okay. And the next time you're sat watching a movie, eating a box of 6 donuts, what are you going to be doing to make sure that the next time we have our session, you have lost the weight or whatever? If you don't do that, you're doing your client a disservice. So I think self-sabotage is something that I would add into that to complement what you've both said. Any more on self-sabotage, David?
Yeah, I was just gonna add a little bit to that, and again, it comes from a webinar that I was listening to last night, and it's simply the fact that, so like, an excuse that some people often come up with is, oh, you're like, I haven't had time. Mm-hmm. And in the webinar last night, it was predominantly around sort of like executive, sort of like leadership and C-suite coaching. But what he was saying was, look, you know, when I work with client, you're like, I just don't accept this. You're like, I haven't had time. He says, you're like, it's a choice. It's a behavioral thing. You know, take responsibility for the fact that you're like, at the time that you should have done something, you chose to do something else. You know, that's it. Because if you can get people to accept responsibility for not doing something, you can equally get them to accept responsibility for doing something. And I think that's the key thing around, you know, because you can talk about semantics between, you know, there was a reason why I didn't do it. You're like, oh, you know, is it an excuse as to why I didn't do it? And, you know, within that, so like just getting the client to acknowledge, you're like what's going on. So examples of sort of previous assessments, an example might be if somebody says that, you're like, in the past I managed to do this, but you're like, now I'm struggling. The ability to, you're like, have the conversation about, right, well, what was working in the past and at what point, and that's a critical question, at what point did it change? You know, like, what started to happen? What was getting in the way? Because you know, it can be a motivation thing, it can be a behavioral aspect, but you're right, you're like, just, you know, finding out, you're like, what's getting in the way? Because if it was getting in the way then, what's to say that it won't get in the way, you're like, this time round? And if that bit isn't explored, you can end up with, you're like, a really good action plan, but to get to the goal, but no plan to overcome, you know, the donuts and you're like getting out from underneath the warm duvet. And you know, I can hold my hand. I've been in both of those, you know, sort of sitting there, sort of like thinking, as I munch my way through donuts, oh, I should really think about dropping some weight, but it would be a shame for these to go off. So like, whilst they're in the bread bin.
I love this example of I haven't got time. So how do you think President Obama, when he was running probably the largest country in the world, managed to find an hour every day for his jog? It was non-negotiable. Do you think he ever felt that he didn't have time, or the excuse, or, you know, valid reasons? Yes, but this was non-negotiable. So then we can start talking about the fact that we all have the same amount of time, and having just a little calculator of, you know, 24 hours in the day, sleep for 7 or 8 of them, work for however many, and usually most people have got 3 or 4 hours left. So what is it that you want to do with them? And using that exercise sometimes makes them realize they actually have got more time than they realized. So yeah, okay. And we're joined today by Nikki Wilde, our Head of Education. So I thought I would just say hello, Nikki, and if you'd like to comment, you're more than welcome if you'd like to chip in.
Hi, yes, thank you. I was just thinking about what you were just saying about the I haven't got time. I always say to clients, I haven't done my homework is no excuse for postponing a session. So if they haven't done if they haven't taken the action that they committed to when they planned it, they have obviously intended to do it. And for whatever reason, if they haven't completed it, well, then that's never an excuse to postpone, because usually that's when the coaching's at its most valuable, to find out what's been getting in the way with their action planning. And if somebody says, I haven't had time, then my question to them is, so what did you choose to do instead? What did you decide was a higher priority or more important than this thing that you committed to the last time we were together? Because as David said, it's a choice. What we are doing in every minute of every day is a choice. not always as conscious as we might like it to be, but it is. And part of us helping our clients to be self-responsible is helping them to notice when they are taking themselves away from the things that they committed to do.
Absolutely. I had exactly what happened today, where I was thinking, I haven't read much this week, and I thought, well, normally I would read all the time, and I thought, well, why haven't I read much this week? And it's because I've been choosing to watch Netflix or Prime and that kind of thing. And it is about raising the client's awareness of where they're choosing to invest their time, isn't it?
And how would you feel about actually saying, well, you're paying for this session, so you're paying for it twice if we're going to go over the old stuff, just putting it out there as well.
I think that's where David was saying around not being friendly, but not friends, so that you can have those tougher conversations if you need to have them, said with care, because obviously your whole point is to help them move forward. But it's being brave enough and confident enough to have those conversations. And I know in the early days for me, it's more just have some phrases somewhere so that you know what, so you're not having to worry in the moment how to say it, but you've actually perhaps created some phrases so that you can have that conversation with confidence.
And it goes back to the contracting, as we said in every single call, you know, during the contracting stage, how would you like to be coached? I can be gently challenging, or I can be, you know, sort of kick butt challenging, which is going to serve you best. And of course, once you've got the answer, you've got to make sure that you do actually challenge in the way that the client has requested. So David, you've talked about real issues and non-real issues in the planning stage, and how do you help the client identify which? What are some of the tips or examples that you could share with us, please?
The main tip is, you know, like, dig into the real issue, because if somebody turns around and it's a simple, what I would call sort of like a simple black and white example, which might be, I'm planning for a holiday and I'm just a little bit disorganized. You know, can you help me to put a plan together? Picking a holiday, so like with everything that's going on in the world, was probably not the best example, but that's the one that I've chosen, so we'll run with that. So that might be just things as I tend to get lost in in thinking about what order, and just working through that so that by the end of it they've almost got the plan of passports, visas, and all of that sort of thing. But if somebody's got an issue whereby they're talking around it rather than talking about it, that's when the coach needs to investigate and start to say, look, what I'm hearing is that you've talked a lot around something, but I don't get the sense that you've actually being honest with what you believe the issue is. So what is it? And at that point, the coach might take a step back and go, the coachee might take a step back and go, actually, you're right. One of the things that's going on for me is. Now, you might not get that in the very first session. If you've got somebody who needs to build that relationship up with the coach before they're comfortable in, bringing everything, but you'll generally get a sense of, of what's going on. So what you're looking for is it something that's superficial, or is there something that's a little bit below the surface? So questions around, when you talk about this, what's going on for you, is a really good way of finding out. Oh, well, hold on, I've never been asked that before. So I don't think I'm as comfortable, or I feel a little bit apprehensive. Okay, so thank you for sharing. I appreciate your honesty, and then you can talk about it further. You got to be careful, and it's always worth flagging up the coaches aren't counselors bit. So sometimes something might come out that you just do need to put a hold on and say, okay, let's just talk about that separately. But understanding what it is that's going on for the client is really important. So working on a real previous example, putting a study plan together, so like for a program that's coming up, and saying something along the lines of, okay, so like there's a program coming up. It's something that was postponed from earlier on in the year. Earlier on in the year, there was a lot of work put into it. The reading was done, the pre-course work was done, but when it was postponed because of COVID, interest was just lost. But now the course is running again, albeit virtually. I need to get back into that. So the superficial level is, okay, let's put a plan together. When can you read? When can you do the pre-course work? When can you take your notes? That's all right. But the underpinning issue is the lack of motivation, the switch off between going from, oh, well, okay, so if the course isn't running and I've got until the back end of the year, I could do loads of reading and loads of studying. I could have read every book on the topic, but I haven't. Something has stopped. That motivation, that lack of energy, that lack of commitment has gone. And if that's not picked up, what you'll end up with is a nice action plan around, Monday, every day, between 1 and 2, I'm going to read my books and I'm going to highlight them. And you might come away with that and go, oh yeah, that's a really good action. Like, how will I know? Well, I'll email you to let you know that I've done it. And then, when you're sitting there thinking, oh, I haven't had an email saying that it's been done, that's because the voice is saying, yes, I can do that because I can. Because capability, the ability to do something, is not the same as the commitment that you're actually going to go in and do it. They are two completely different things. And understanding that, as you talk about, then this is where experience comes in. Because if I talk about, so like using this example of, I can put a reading plan together. I'll get excited about that because that's easy. That's just highlights and it's in the diary. But if somebody asks me the question, go, okay, so what was it that stopped you? And I go, I just lost interest. Automatically, there's a down tone. So in the way that I speak. And so if you were face to face, you would see that the body language change as well. You can only see so much on video. Okay, so you lost commitment, you lost energy. When was that? I just, over time, as time went on, I was really up for it. But now, because it was delayed and changed, I've lost that interest. Okay, so if you've lost that interest, how will that impact you putting the reading plan together? Well, I can put the plan together, but okay. And then this is where the ability to challenge comes in and say, okay, so if you were still in the position that you are now, how likely is it that the plan that you put together is going to work? Honestly, well, it'll look nice, but no, it's just not going to get done. Okay, why is that? And I appreciate that's a why question, but I tend to, a few of you know, I tend to ask why questions. I've just lost that motivation. Okay, so the overall goal then is getting this sorted, but the key issue is this motivation and commitment. Okay, right. Now we know what we're dealing with. So, and then you work from that, and that is dealing with the underpinning issue. The core, the root cause, rather than the superficial bit. At the top. There are other examples, other examples as well that you can pick out from that, which is the thing to remember around this is that behavior is relatively easy to change. It's some of the things that you can generally do, in a session or a couple of sessions, but things around motivation and values and beliefs, which are a little bit more deep-seated or deep-rooted, they take longer to change. So one of the other things as well is that in when you get the action plan stage in the coaching session, is recognizing that you don't build Rome in a day. It's about looking at it and going, right, in this time that we've got, am I going to fix that? And with possibly some exceptions, but if somebody has lost all or the majority of motivation or commitment towards something, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, 90 minutes is not going to fix it. It's going to start a journey of fixing it over a period of time because it's deep rooted. If it's behavioral, if it was just that action plan, you could have the reading plan, so like within like 15 minutes or so. But it's just that ability to dig into it. So one of the indicators I mentioned earlier on was building the confidence, and recognizing the capability. So for something like that, you know that they can do it because they've already done it. Okay. What you want to know is, okay, so you were motivated and committed before, because you've explained that. So you know that that's there. So what is it that that will help you to get back to, if not that same level, at least on that journey? And some of the questions you can then start to throw in are the ones that we talked about in the previous sessions around, well, what would be the impact of getting to getting to the day of the program and having not done this work? Oh God, it'd be a nightmare. I would just feel about this big. Okay, so is that what you want? Oh God, no. Okay. And then you can start to see how energy moves around. So like with people around, no, I absolutely don't want that. Right. Okay. So you've got energy in there and you've got enthusiasm. All we really need to do is help you find how you start to tie that back in. And that is working at a much deeper level. And it's the same for behavioral, depending upon what topics. It's the same for going back to running, for example. I hate running with a passion, or jogging. Other sports, yeah, fine. When I was kickboxing, one of the key things was you had to run. It was just a key. You didn't. If you didn't run when you went into the ring, so you generally got battered because you didn't have the relevant stamina. So my coach used to always say, right, are you going to go for a run? Yeah, probably. Right. What does probably mean? Usual sort of thing. And then, right, what's it going to be like? So when somebody chases you around the ring, bearing in mind, so they're going to do this for a number of minutes, over a duration of time. And by halfway through the first round of 5, you're exhausted and they're, full of energy and they're just battering you to death. Well, that's not going to be very pleasant, is it? No, it probably isn't. So what are you going to do? I'll go for a run. And that's what got me out. It was just that, okay, well, what's the option? What's the downside of not doing this? So there are all sorts of ways, and you can do the plus side as well. It just depends who you're working with.
Fear motivation can be very strong, can't it?
Yeah, and it should never be underestimated. And just briefly while we're on the topic, and again, it's something that comes up, and if it doesn't come up here, it comes up in the managing accountability, so the sort of penultimate CPD call, is a lot of people tend to use scaling questions towards the end of a session. So things like, okay, now that we've done this, how committed are you on a scale of 1 to 10? How committed, how enthusiastic, how motivated? A word of caution is that if you've only got a couple of minutes left and they turn around and say, I don't know, probably a 6, and you really wanted them to be saying 9 or 10, you haven't got time to really explore and and work with them on it. So there's nothing wrong with asking these questions at the beginning and saying, look, okay, so looking at this, how committed are you to working with it? And they might say, well, 6, and then midway through, just checking on that and saying, okay, so I just want to check in at this point. At the beginning of the session, you said you were only on a 6 for commitment. Through the conversation that we've had so far, where are you now on that commitment scale? Yeah, probably a 7 because things are getting better. Okay, what do you mean by probably? What's the shift, and where is that shift? And that starts to let you know that at least some of what you're doing must be working. But it also lets you know, so whether going back to Dawn, your comment about self-sabotage, have they got something implanted either consciously or unconsciously, that says, I'm never going to get this done. Because if they've got something like that, it's likely to come up in conversation anyway. But it gives you that sense of, you're like, as you're moving through, yeah, you're like, there's nothing there, we're making progress, or there is something there that needs to be addressed before you can make progress. A lot of that, again, we wouldn't necessarily expect people that are like a practitioner level, and I don't mean to do anybody a disservice with that statement, to pick up on all of those different nuances, but anybody who's listening who has plans, so like to move on to senior and master, at that level we would. So there's an expectation of really picking up on those nuances.
I would also say at the end of the call, or when you've got 2 or 3 minutes left, don't rely on the sort of textbook. What I hear a lot when I'm assessing students is, how motivated are you? Okay, how committed are you? How enthusiastic are you? It's like, you only need to pick one. Is in the book, it's an example. But Ruby, back to you in terms of identifying the real topic. How do you as a coach deal with that? Say you're 10 minutes or half an hour into the call, when you think your intuition is telling you that actually this might not be the real issue. How would you deal with it, please?
I think it's pausing the session and having that conversation with the client, because if you allow it to go on, you could be, just as David saying, you're not going really underneath the surface. And what we want to do is not only help our client move forward, we actually want them also to be learning life tools that they can use. So for example, if they're doing a self-sabotage, they will learn ways to get out of that self-sabotage after the coaching relationship ends. So I think it would be speaking to them and just saying, can we just pause for a moment? I've just noticed that this is happening, and I just want to ask a few questions around why you perhaps said that. I do use the word why occasionally as well, David, and why you perhaps said that in this moment, or I'm picking up and sensing something. So we're sort of drawing on that intuition. I think it's really when you're actively listening, and that will go back obviously to session 5, but when you're really actively listening, you'll start to notice when something's not quite tallying up. And it's so easy in the early days to just think, well, I'm going through this list and I've been told this, and like you were saying with the, how committed are you? And good, they've got an action plan, and you think, oh, I've done a really great job. They've got the action plan. They come back to me the next session and I've done a really good job. But actually, you might be working with completely the wrong issue because you haven't gone a bit deeper with them. And I think that it does come with experience, but I think it's being okay with actually saying, let's just pause for a moment, because I'm picking up on this isn't the main thing. There's other things going on that I think we need to address. Are you happy for me to explore that with you now? And then go through that with them in the session.
What about you, Nikki?
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think that it's the sign of the confidence of the coach to be able to pause a session when something doesn't feel right, whether it's that whether you're picking up that there's something going on unsaid, or that you're noticing a pattern of behaviour creeping back in that they're perhaps less aware of. I think it's important for us to be able to say to our clients, let's just pause for a moment and check in. And I'll quite often use a sort of an NLP detachment thing. I'll say, so just imagine for a moment, you and I were stood outside the window watching this session. What do you think I've just noticed? And it's a way of getting them to sort of, that's the same thing as the example that David said earlier. What would the little teddy bear on the desk have just noticed happening? Just to try and train them so that they don't, ideally, I don't want them to rely on me spotting things. I want to help them to learn that skill for themselves. So by just now and again pausing, even if things are going brilliantly, sometimes I'll do that and just check in and say, so if we were sitting watching this on a movie, or we were outside the window watching, or the thing on the desk was watching this session, what do you think they've just noticed about you, your energy, your commitment, what you just said? And it can be quite a useful little exercise to help them to learn that skill, so that when we're not with them, they're still doing that for themselves and raising their awareness.
That's lovely.
I have had clients where I have stopped the coaching full stop and said, there is clearly something going on that's getting in the way of this, and until you're ready to progress with the coaching, I'm not prepared to carry on with the sessions, because it's not a good use of your or my time, money and energy to carry on the way things are. And sometimes threatening to take the coaching away is enough of a wake-up call to snap them out of whatever it is that they've been doing that's been getting in the way.
Well, you're a tough lady.
One client in 12 years, I've only properly sacked one client, but he deserved it. Interestingly, in that moment, as soon as I took it, and it was this action planning, he would commit to things every session. Very experienced. He was a senior partner in an accountancy practice, and we were talking about his exit route and his retirement plan. And he was very committed in the session. And every session he would come back and tell me the things he hadn't done. And after 3 meetings, he had his 3 strikes and you're out kind of conversation. And as soon as I took the coaching away, he was then prepared to open up on all the beliefs and things that he held that he was protecting himself from. But it took me taking the coaching away for him to be able to open up and have that conversation. So sometimes we serve our clients well by stopping the coaching.
And again, it comes down to confidence, doesn't it? Having the confidence and not being desperate to have every client, and recognizing that sometimes it's not the right scenario or the right client, and you know, challenging them if they're not doing what they say they're going to do. I would also add that particularly for new students or new practitioners, when their intuition is kicking in, and it means they're doing a good job with the listening and the questioning, and they sense that there is another issue, is depending on the time. Let's say it's a 30-minute session and you get this in the first 10 minutes. Say, you know, we were only 10 minutes into our call, we can easily change to such and such, which would serve you best. I think the which question is very underrated, but it's a very powerful question. You know, which one was going to get you to your goal quicker for the remainder of our time? If you actually don't uncover something until much later into the call, and you know it's a 30-minute session, there's no point in changing, you can say to the client, I was sensing that there's some underlying issues such and such. How accurate is that? And they say yes. Okay, so in a future session, perhaps we can come back to that. I never say that's what we'll talk about in the next session, because obviously it's their agenda. And then if you keep a note of those things, there might come a time with a long-term client where they say, do you know what, everything was pretty good and I can't think of anything today, but they obviously don't want to cancel. And you can go back to your crib sheet and say, well, in the past, there was a couple of things that we identified, but we didn't have time to talk about in that session. Which one of those would you like to address now? And it's amazing how many times they'll say, do you know what, that is spot on. So there's just a couple of techniques or questions of dealing with other issues that arise depending on where in the session it comes up. But people have a tendency to want to please, don't they? So that's why, as you said, David, when it's a case of, you know, creating the plan, that's easy, we can do that. And as new coaches, we think, phew, pat on the back, job well done. It doesn't mean you've addressed the issue. I'll just share this with you. I've got a doctor friend, and in the medical profession, she said they call it hand on handle syndrome. So, you know, you've got 10 minutes with the doctor and they've written the prescription, and the person walks up, they've got their hand on the handle, and the doctor looks up and says, was there something else? And they say, yes, actually. That's when they've had the 10 minutes, they feel, you know, they've dealt with the ingrown toenail or whatever little thing it was they were testing you with. Now they're ready to tell you the big thing. And if you don't listen actively and use your intuition, you can leave it right to the end when they've got their hand on the handle, and it's sometimes too late because, you know, you don't get another opportunity. So any thoughts before we move on?
No, I would agree with that. I think sort of within coaching, you need to be careful of the, like, is there anything else question, you know, like when you get to the end of a session, because at that point they might go, oh, well, you're like, yeah, thank you for asking. Yes, there is. And you just get a wave of things. But I think you're absolutely right. The listening to your intuition, and getting that sense of, you're like, I'm sensing something else is going on here. And just picking up on Nikki's point, which I think is incredibly valid, is that some people say they want coaching, but all they really want is somebody to talk to, with no intention of doing what it is. They don't want to put the work in. They've got no commitment to it. They just want to sort of like go through the motions. And if you find you're with somebody like that, there is a point of just saying, you're like, you know what, forget it. You might be a little bit more professionally polite than that, but you're like, principally that's what it is. And I think so. Like the other thing as well is that again, going back to the contracting stage, I often reference like Marshall Goldsmith's three elements that he looks for. So like that people have courage, humility, and discipline, in the sense of you need to have courage to go through the process. You need to have humility to face potentially some negative feedback, or some feedback around things that you might not like, and have the humility to deal with that. But you need to have the discipline to go through the process. And if that wanes or wavers at any point during the coaching sessions, you can revert back to that and say, look, remember when we first talked, you said that you had the humility to deal with this, and you also said that you have the discipline to to see this through. But I'm not seeing that at the minute. And this is where we come back to creating awareness through feedback and challenge. You might not be able to do that in every session, but certainly if it's a follow-up session, and somebody's not doing what they said they were going to do, that's where the challenge comes in. Look, you said you were going to do this. I'm not seeing it. What's going on? Yeah, because the adage of you can lead a horse to water, is absolutely true. I'm sure somebody will come up with you can give a coachee an action plan, but you can't make them do it. It's all around that. It's having the courage to go back, because we come back to this. You can be friendly, but you're not being paid to just have a chat. If they want to have a chat over a coffee, they've probably, well, hopefully they've got friends. I mean, again, chatting over a coffee is probably a wrong, with everything that's going on in the world, is probably a virtual coffee or a virtual smoothie, as we often call it. But it's just getting used to. And I think the other thing, I was cutting myself mid-conversation, just something that dawned on me while I was reflecting whilst I was talking, is certainly for those coaches who are listening to this that are maybe relatively new or practicing new things, think about how you feel, or in reflection, how you felt when you challenge somebody, or think about what it was that you felt, or what it was that you thought that prevented you from challenging somebody, because that's a learning process as well.
And just picking up on that doctor's question, hand on handle, is there anything else? It's definitely not a coaching question, but we hear it a lot in the assessments right at the very end. And I think it's got something to do with being very polite and British. Is there anything else? It's completely meaningless at the end of a coaching call, because there is no time. And if you're a professional coach and you've got back-to-back clients, you can't give them the time. So what was the point in asking? Because if they say yes, you've immediately got to cut them off. And what does that do to the rapport? So is there anything else at the end is a no. You've got to get used to, and we'll discuss this much more in the next session, ending a call as professionally as you started the call. It's amazing how many people just don't know how to end the call. What would you say some of your tips on that, Ruby, in terms of action planning? How would you end a call and that section?
Well, as you were talking, actually, I was remembering a client who you would get to about 5 minutes before the end, And then she said, oh, I need to ask you some questions about these different things. So it's more a mentoring question anyway. And it was guaranteed every time. So I kind of, at first I didn't even notice it. It just kind of went past me. But it's about having those boundaries. So I think really one that I love is just setting the timescale. So in our last 5 minutes together, because again, it's just saying we're coming to the end of this session. So I think that's a nice way of doing it. I think also just asking them what support they might need, and you know, those standard ones that perhaps we did do in T-Grow, but they still have their value. I've got a love-hate relationship with T-Grow. I don't know about anyone else. There's some bits of it I think, yeah, that's fantastic, and other bits I think, oh no, it's just too restricting. But some of those questions around, you know, what support have you got, what resources do you need, and what's going to, you know, if you don't do this, what's going to impact you, some things around those. But I do think the boundary of giving a heads up that we're coming to the end makes a huge difference. Once I started practicing that, and with that particular client, the way I addressed it was just saying, I've noticed that there's a few questions at the end. If you want to, what we can do is stack up those questions and we can perhaps address them in the next coaching session. So basically your time's run out, but very politely, no, I'm not answering these right now because I know that's going to take me at least half an hour. You're paying me for coaching anyway. So yes, I think boundaries for you. And also I think it's very easy to run over because we want to be of service when actually what we need to be mindful of, they might be running to another appointment as well. Even if you might not be, they might be running to another appointment. So it's being mindful of their time at the end of that session.
That's a really good point, Ruby, because although we're in the business of having a conversation, what is it about coaching that makes a lot of coaches think they can just continue chatting? You know, the client, as you say, has got another appointment. You don't have that with an accountant, and I'm sure Nikki as an accountant is nodding here, yeah, or a solicitor or a driving instructor. When your time is up, your session is up, and that is it. So finishing with confidence and professionally is really important. I heard one student actually say T-Grow out loud, and it was the first time I'd heard it, and it was lovely. She would say, you know, so what is the topic for today? Okay, so let's explore the goal. Now we'll move into the reality of the situation. Okay, so let's explore the options. Now it's time to wrap up. So like you were saying, Ruby, it's managing expectations, but saying T-Grow out loud, I think is a good way to work if you're using that particular model. What would you like to add to that, Nikki? Because I'm also conscious of time. We are going to have to start wrapping up yet, but I don't want to cut anybody off.
I was just going to add, just picking up on what you were saying about the hand on the door question. For me, that's a reality stage question. So the question that if you want to ask that question and check in, so I will quite often check in with clients maybe midway through a session, depending on what it is we're working on. Was there anything else you hoped we would have covered at this point? And that's one of my reality stage questions before we get into the, right, this is the thing you're focusing on right now. Let's work through your options and put your action plan in place. Because I've given them the opportunity to mention something else that we might come back to at a future point. And so there's no concerns about leaving them in there. So if a coach does want to use that, is there anything else bit, then for me that comes in that's a reality check stage, because we're checking in what's going on for them. It's part of that reality. Where are you right now? What else is going on for you? So that's the point I would use it, rather than at the end of a session.
Yeah, and using it as a where are you is a great use of the where question. David?
I don't think I would, surprisingly so, I don't think I would actually add anything. I think Ruby, so and Nikki have beautifully covered that.
Okay. Any top tips, anything else that you would like to share on action planning before we wrap up?
I think
oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go on, Ruby, after you.
I was going to say, I'd like to say something. If you know that you're a coach that has to have clients that like taking action, then make that part of your marketing message so that you will attract more of those people. So you can, you know, in mine, I'll say I only take clients who are willing to take action. So I'm quite upfront about it. And when I have the discovery calls, I'm upfront about it, because then that helps people identify whether you are actually the right coach for them in the first place, and that way that saves everybody from wasting any of their time, energy and money.
Great point. You only want proactive clients. David?
I would sort of totally agree with that. You know, similar statement. You know, like, I only want to work with clients who are prepared to put the effort in. You know, to change whatever it is that that they're working on. There are a number of people out there who similar to Ruby, have this well in their marketing, which is before you even get to the appointment stage, you have to tick a number of boxes, which is yeah, I understand the process, I understand it's a discovery call, and we may or we may not end up working together. And by the way, I can afford to do what it is that you're offering to do with me. And if you don't tick all of those three boxes, certainly thinking about one person's website, you just don't get through to the calendar. It's just black and white. I think and it links into the next CPD call that we're going to do, but certainly in that action planning stage is understanding what are you going to do, when are you going to do it by, what's the reason you're doing it, and to what standard are you going to do it. So there's who has to do what by when, to what standard, for what reason. And what that starts to draw together is the understanding of the who, which will be, in most cases, will be the client. But if you've asked questions around who can support you, what else needs to happen, what are your resources, which of these resources will serve you the best, then they may be turning around saying, yeah, I need to get somebody to do this for me. It's still their action, but it's sort of linked to somebody else. The has to do what is the action plan. The who bit nails down who's got responsibility for this, which is also something you can ask right at the beginning as well. Right at the outset of a session. Okay, as we're going to get into this, let me just check. Okay, who's when we come up with this action plan at the end, who's responsible for getting that done? Well, that would be me. Okay, remember that, because we'll be coming back to that when we get to the end of the session. So you sort of nail them in that right at the outset. So who has to do what by when is the time scale. The other bits that I tend to add on to that is to what standard, so that you've got an understanding of what sort of quality, and the for what reason reaffirms what you would have done right at the outset, which is, and you're doing this why. The purpose of doing these is for you to achieve that goal. So if you can get, and the other thing as well, something that a number of coaches fall into the habit of, habit might be the wrong word, but is not getting the client, and again this will come back to the other session, but not getting the client to tell you what they're doing, and will from their own notes will go, okay, so what you've agreed to do is, and then just read them off from a list. Always get the client to say, right, okay, so we've been talking about a lot of actions, what are you going to do, when are you going to do it by, tell me what you're going to do, tell me what your action plan is. Because remember, the definition, without the indicators and the pluses and minuses, the ability to create an effective coaching plan with the client, an effective plan that they can act upon. So you're right, okay, so tell me, what is it that you're going to do? When are you going to do it by? And then we come back to Dawn, what you were saying at the outset, which is okay, so who are you going to tell? Who's going to support you? How will they know that you've done it? How will I know that you've done it? Oh, well, through this, and this.
And all of this just reinforces that the coaching relationship is one that empowers the coachee. And a trap that I hear some people fall into when I am assessing is them saying, okay, so, and we'll address this a lot more in call number 11, is I've taken loads of notes, I'll get them to you in a week, and then you can follow up. It's like, hello, who's supposed to be doing the work here? Why would any coach be taking all the notes, go away, type them all up in their free time and send them to the client? It goes back to what you were saying, Ruby and David, if you want proactive clients who are committed to taking action, and that starts in the contract stage, that, you know, get yourself a lovely journal and a pad, a pen, whatever, because you're going to be taking notes. You're going to want to record all the actions that we're going to be brainstorming. Don't rely on me to send you an email afterwards saying what we've discussed, because it's not my plan. Nikki, you're nodding. What, if anything, would you like to add to this?
I'm smiling to myself because it does take me, with some of my clients, it takes a little bit longer than others to train them to understand that they are responsible for the note taking and the action planning, and that is definitely something that is close to my heart in the next session, that managing their progress and accountability. And is it for us to chase them, or is it for them to report into us? And I think I suspect David and Dawn and I have quite strong views on which way around that should be, and the clients don't always get it up front, so there is an element of training the client.
There is.
But I would just say through the whole of the action plan, it's just notice that energy curve fluctuating through the coaching session. We know through T-Grow, at the start you get that excitement as they start talking about their goals and the energy goes up, and then the reality check as they start recognizing the things that have got in the way, it can come back down, and then hopefully they start getting excited about their options, and then sometimes that realization of the commitment to actually go, now I've actually got to go and do it, brings the energy down. So you kind of got this energy roller coaster during a session, and my aim is generally to leave the client pretty much where I found them, on an energetic level. I don't want to leave them on a high and then they leave the call and everything crashes back down to earth when they walk back into their normal daily life. I don't want to leave them on a low where they're so demotivated that they can't even get off the sofa. So I try to gauge where I'm starting at with the client and more or less leave them where I found them in an energy level, maybe slightly up, so they've got a bit of a positive boost. But it's just watching that energy fluctuation as we particularly through the action planning bit. It's okay if the energy comes back down, I think, because that's them recognizing that there's going to be some effort involved, but make sure that they're not, the energy doesn't dip so low that they then leave so demoralized that it's going to be too much like hard work. So that would be my last tip, is just monitor that energy level and check where you're leaving.
Good point.
Yeah, and I'd like to throw something out, and I'm throwing this out as a rhetorical question for those people who will be joining us for the next one, which is, does time management actually exist? Would be question number one. And is multitasking physically possible? As another question. And there's a reason why I'm asking that, and that will come out in the next session about managing progress and accountability.
Which is on the
and I will be, if memory serves, I will be making a metaphorical reference to the film The Stepmom with Julia Roberts. So if anybody wants to quickly watch that between now and next month, then by all means do it, and you'll totally understand what I'm on about.
Okay. Well, that call's on the 20th of November. And we hope you'll be joining us then. And you, Nikki, you're more than welcome to join Betska, who's our guest speaker that day. And then we'll be on to the last call, which is the 18th of December, which is a summary. Again, Nikki, it'd be great if you could join us for that, where we pull all the best bits together in one powerful call. So thank you for your interest. I know that this series has been very well received. We get lots of fabulous feedback. Even people delaying their live assessment call until they've heard all the calls, just in case they miss a gem. But really, you don't have to do that. I'm sure you're absolutely fine. This is just to help you. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Stay safe, and thank you for your interest.
Yep. Take care, everyone. Stay safe and well.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruby. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.